I'm now going to move to the last of today's submissions, Mr. Scobie, King's Counsel.
Thank you, sir. I appear along with Piers Marquis. We are instructed by Paul Heron of the Public Interest Law Centre. We represent the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and former leading member of the Socialist Workers' Party, Lyndsay. We also represent Michael Chant of the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. These are short submissions on the evidence of the managers and security services. We have provided written submissions available on the PILC website. They are summarised here. So, at the end of Tranche 1, you found that the infiltrations of both the SWP and RCPB-ML were not justified. In Tranche 2, the SDS themselves conceded the lack of justification for deployments into the RCPB-ML by ending the infiltration. In respect to the SWP, the Met Police have focused on the events at Welling in 1993. We have extensive submissions on the evidence around Welling, which we will return to in Tranche 3. We ask to be allowed to develop wider submissions on both organisations at the close of Tranche 2. Our focus now is on CND, partly because the deployments into the peace movement started and ended in the Tranche 2 period, and partly because both the Met Police and the security services have sought to argue justifications for the infiltration of CND. Those justifications are not supported by the evidence. There is silence as to A, who authorised the infiltrations, and B, what the highly personal and intrusive reporting was used for. Security services. Witness Y weakly asserted that A, CND was assessed to have been infiltrated at a national level by communists, and B, it took until 1985 for MI5 to work out this was no longer true. That is contrary to the evidence. Even in the 1970s, when Communist Party members had occupied 8 of the 15 seats on CND's National Council, MI5 had not required SDS intelligence on CND. Those days were long over when John Kerry was deployed. In February 1982, the SDS assessment was that Communist Party influence had waned quite dramatically, and there was no foreseeable likelihood of Trotskyist influence growing, in particular on the National Council. MI5 reviewed and agreed with that assessment. Witness Y conceded, in line with Cathy Massiter's account, that MI5 did not consider CND to be a subversive organisation. They do not explain why they continued to encourage reporting on individuals they knew were not subversive. MI5 is silent on the ethical implications of encouraging long-term undercover deployments against political activists and campaigners. Witness Y recognises the weakness of MI5's justification, yet, rather than concede it, the security services adopt a revisionist approach, implying that spying on the peace movement was more acceptable then than it would be now. Lord Denning said in 1963, for most people it would have been intolerable to us to have anything in the nature of Gestapo or secret police to snoop into all that we do. It would have been considered an unacceptable intrusion, a waste of resources, and an egregious example of state interference in the democratic process. MI5 cannot pretend that things were different then. They were not. The proof is in the wide public denunciation of the investigations of Madeleine Haig and the widespread public anger to the Cathy Massiter revelations. It is in the instigation of the Home Affairs Select Committee inquiry into the activity of Special Branches in 1984. The most damning proof is the Security Service's own collusion in deceiving the public by stating they and the Special Branch did not cover law-abiding, non-violent activities like CND activities. They plainly did. SDS managers, the senior police officers in charge of the SDS between 1981 and 86 have not assisted the inquiry. Most of the officers who managed CND deployments have passed away. The documents associated with their periods as managers disclosed by the Met Police and Security Services are silent as to both justification and authorisation. Detective Inspector Trevor Butler actively denied dealing with any officer reporting on CND, despite the clear evidence that he signed off many of John Kerry's early reports. Eric Docker, the SDS Detective Inspector for the end of Tim Spence's deployment, does not know what the justification was. All he can offer is that CND deployments, quote, would have given us intelligence on likely numbers and aims of particular demonstrations. Even the Commissioner's annual report from 1983 emphasises the peaceful and orderly nature of CND demonstrations. So, that explanation does not assist at all. Chief Inspector Malcolm MacLeod was sceptical about the civil disobedience rationale that he himself noted in the 1986 annual SDS report. His firm position now is that the infiltration was not justified. In the documents from his time as a manager, he referred to CND targeting decisions coming from his masters. Those masters were clearly not MI5, because that is who he was speaking to when he used the term. A safe assumption is that his masters were chief superintendents and above within the Met Police. The only chief superintendent this inquiry has heard from is Jeff Craft, who claims to remember nothing at all. MacLeod claims that he cannot now remember who he was referring to. In respect of CND, whoever was pulling the strings was bypassing MI5. Tony Waite is a key manager. For the first 8 months of his posting as SDS Chief Inspector, he managed John Kerry, Lee Bonson, and Timothy Spence. The documents from his time give some indication of the authority for the targeting. In July 1984, when Waite was new to the role, MI5 visited the SDS offices. Unusually, the S Squad Chief Superintendent, Ray Tucker, was also there. He'd recently taken over the command of S Squad from Jeff Craft. In the meeting, Waite said that in his view, 3 CND sources was too much. At the time, John Kerry was attending CND London Council meetings and had access to the London Regional Office. The Security Service were concerned that his forthcoming withdrawal would leave a considerable gap, and it would take some time before Spence could fill it. Both MI5 and Tucker questioned whether it was necessary to end John Kerry's deployment. The upper echelons of Special Branch wanted to keep CND infiltrated. By November 8, 1984, when it was clear that Kerry's deployment was over, MI5 requested that Spence be directed against the SWP rather than CND. There was a strong precedent for doing exactly that. A, Chief Inspector Waite admits that most SDS deployments were in agreement with MI5. B, Waite admits that it was always our aim to deploy additional officers into the SWP. C, the SDS have not met MI5's request to have an officer infiltrate SWP HQ since the departure of Phil Cooper. D, at that time, the SDS only had one officer infiltrating the SWP, and E, that officer, Alan Bond, was not moving to the Brixton branch as he'd been told to do. Despite all of this, Waite refused the MI5 request and was set on making Timothy Spence John Kerry's successor in CND. Once again, the masters, whoever they were bypassing MI5 on CND targeting. 2 months later, in January 1985, the SDS were wavering on whether to continue CND deployments in the light of the Parliamentary Select Committee. Unsurprisingly, with the committee's focus on CND and the danger of Special Branch acquiring a sinister reputation, for persecuting harmless citizens for political reasons. Nevertheless, the deployments continued. Waite claimed not to be able to recall why he refused MI5's wish to task Spence into the SWP and instead continued the targeting of CND. He claims not to recall anything about the Select Committee proceedings or having any discussion with senior special branch management about the justification for infiltrating CND. He makes no mention at all of Cathy Massiter. He was in role at the time of her revelations, and he was aware that, as a matter of general practice, security service desk officers knew who SDS officers were if it affected their desk. In the 1985 annual report, he acknowledged that the Massiter disclosures were a breach of SDS security. He recognised that a failure in security would give rise to a possibility of embarrassment, not just for the Commissioner, which is the standard manager line, but for the government of the time. Waite's failure to even mention Cathy Massiter in his statement is astonishing. Along with Chief Superintendent Kraft and every other senior special branch officer with knowledge of the CND infiltrations, Tony Waite will remember Madeleine Hay and the Select Committee inquiry very well indeed. Special branch's panic around the Cathy Massiter revelations would be unforgettable. Waite's retrospective justification of the CND infiltrations is weak. He cannot give a single example of contribution to policing public order. His second justification was that, quote, CND was targeted because they had the potential for subversion. Alongside his own definition of subversion, that amounts to the potential for a desire to change the natural order of things. That encapsulates Special Branch's approach, that they could spy on whoever they wished to, as long as they didn't get caught. On the issues of justification and authorization, the SDS managers have provided no assistance to this inquiry at all. Equally, the disclosure provided by the Metropolitan Police has provided similarly no assistance. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner. The Metropolitan Police submit that the deployment of undercover officers into CND and Lambeth Women for Peace was justifiable on two grounds. One, concern that CND could be infiltrated by communist groups in the KGB. Two, a US Air Force commander's written view that increased aggressiveness and venturism around the US air bases could lead to protesters being shot. The first submission is unsustainable. It doesn't explain the sudden interest in CND at exactly the time that Communist Party influence was widely reported to have declined. The reference to the KGB shows a remarkable lack of political understanding. The inquiry has itself acknowledged that engagement or affiliation with the Soviet Union would have been anathema to the groups infiltrated by the SDS. As far as their second submission, exhibiting correspondence between the US Air Force and the Ministry of Defence does not provide an evidential basis for a retrospective submission on that justification. It appears in an evidential void, not least because no police witness has ever mentioned it. In the letter to the Home Office attached to the 1984 annual report, Assistant Commissioner John Dello refers to briefings to provincial chief constables and Ministry of Defence police tasked with securing military installations in their area. There is no reference to any SDS report in either the sections on Green Common or CND or the reports of Kerry and Bonser. There is nothing to suggest on the SDS's own material that the intelligence originated from SDS officers rather than another source. The inquiry cannot assess the value of any such briefings or whether any of the intelligence was sourced from Kerry or Bonser without having cited them. If the Commissioner wishes to provide an evidential basis to their submissions, the Met Police should look to their own documents and then disclose them. The US Air Force's proposed solution to protester incursions was an increase in RAF security and guard dog patrols at the bases. At no stage did the US Air Force suggest sending undercover police officers into the homes of law-abiding citizens. The Commissioner submits that the MPSB was obliged to monitor CND. linking that obligation to significant government and military interests in the 1980s. That was the firmest indicator yet of where the authorization for the CND deployments came from. Government targeting. The focus of the inquiry's investigations on government to date has been the Home Office. There is disclosure that suggests a rift between the Met Police and the Home Office in early 1983. The timing of that rift coincides with the recruitment of both Bonser and Spence. On 24th of January 1983, the NPSB finalised a report titled Political Extremism and the Campaign for Police Accountability in the NPS District. There is detailed analysis of the report in the Tranche 1 closing statement of Celius Stubbs. The report focused on the Labour-controlled GLC and local authority groups and their efforts to hold the police accountable for their actions. Outside of London, police forces were accountable under the Police Act 1964 to a committee drawn from the community that they policed. In the Met Police District, the statutory provision for accountability was different, and no committee drawn from any community in the district had the right to receive a report from the Met Police or make a requirement of it. Historically, local councillors had voiced their concerns and objections to this state of affairs. The GLC had gone further and established a police committee and launched a campaign for accountability in the Met Police. The report suggested that this was an undisguised attempt to secure ultimate control of the Metropolitan Police. Special Branch followed the campaign in detail from the outset and collected a massive information about the personalities and groups involved. At least some of the intelligence came from the SDS. The report listed civil rights groups, members of parliament, councillors, law centres and bank account details. Many of those named have gone on to have successful political and legal careers. The Police Accountability Group shared similarities with CND. They were single-issue campaigns with broad church support and policies backed by the Labour Party of the time. They posed no legitimate public order or subversion concerns. The report was politically partisan, an attempt to undermine the efforts of a democratically elected council to hold the police to account. Copies went to the most senior police officers and the security service. On the 27th of January 1983, a copy was sent to the Home Office. Commander Wilson described it as a most comprehensive report. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Hewitt called it important and sent copies to other senior officers so they could use it when dealing with and countering police accountability groups. The Assistant Commissioner, on behalf of the Commissioner, referred to it as an excellent piece of work. The response from the Home Office was not so complimentary. Sir Hayden Phillips and Sir Brian Coven discussed the report and contacted Hewitt to convey their, quote, very serious concern at the breadth and tone of a market for that report. Hewitt expressed his thanks that the matter was not being raised formally and undertook to reflect on what the Home Office had said. He replied on the 4th of March 1983, and I quote, "We are dealing here with a broader concept of public order intelligence, and on this particular aspect, I have probably gone as far as this special branch should go." There was nothing in the report that could be said to relate to public order. The response gives insight into just how far the Met Police felt they could push the ultimate defence line of jamming any activity into a public order justification. The Home Office saw that the response did not stand up to examination and believed that police did too. Hayden Phillips described Hewitt's reference to a broader concept of public order intelligence as meaningless as expressed and dangerous in application. Hayden Phillips told the inquiry MPSB had gone too far and were looking into legitimate political activity which was not subversive. It was in breach of the 1970 Special Branch terms of reference. Later in March 1983, the commander of Special Branch wrote to the Chief Superintendent of C Squad, Derek Neal, and tasked him to continue. The most senior Metropolitan Police and Special Branch officers had decided, first, they could use Special Branch resources, including the SDS, to resist lawful attempts by a democratically elected council to make the police accountable to the community they were supposed to be serving. As an afterthought, the implausible ultimate defence line of a public order justification was added. Secondly, they could do so despite having been told by the Home Office that they could not, and having said via Hewitt that they would not. This was a willful assault on democratic activity, acting beyond police powers with knowingly unsustainable justification, in direct contravention of an order from a government ministry. The Met Police were intent on maintaining their own power. They would not have acted in this manner unless they were confident of support from an authority higher than the Home Office. There is evidence that in February and March 1983, the Met Special Branch were engaging directly with the highest levels of government. Margaret Thatcher made a direct and specific request to the police in respect of intelligence on the peace movement. That led to the requirement of Lee Bonser by Neil. Malcolm MacLeod indicated that as the SDS Chief Inspector, he would not be surprised if the Prime Minister had a role in Bonser's tasking because, and I quote, the whole thing became very politicised. Whilst Hewitt was writing his informal response to the Home Office concerns, Bonser was recruited, vetted and deployed. Spence was also recruited into CND and police accountability groups. Both Bonser and Spence have refused to come to this inquiry and elaborate on that evidence. National Archive releases from January to April 1983 demonstrate that the government was preoccupied with losing the battle of public opinion, with CND over disarmament. The Prime Minister's office was concerned by the apparent success being enjoyed by CND and intent on devising ways of neutralising CND publicity. On the 31st of January 1983, the Prime Minister formed the Ministerial Group on Nuclear Policy and Public Opinion, and a special unit was to set up to devote full-time attention to media issues and think imaginatively about them. The group included the Secretary of Defence, Michael Heseltine, included Sir Robert Armstrong, who had signed the 1976 and 1977 authorisation for the SDS's continued existence. Armstrong has recently been accused of extraordinary perjury by the former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull in respect of evidence he gave in 1986 when he denied the government's use of the author Chapman Pincher to manipulate a media narrative. In March 1983, the Ministry of Defence commenced the DS-19 propaganda unit, which launched a campaign against CND. The 28 CND members named in the Conservative press as communist sympathisers, MI5 had supplied DS-19 with information on only 7. John Kerry had reported on 27 of the 28, Heseltine's letter and speech on the 22nd of April 1983, referencing the narrative of the press campaign and the calculated political professionalism of full-time socialists and communists had been discussed in the Ministerial Group on Nuclear Policy and Public Opinion in the week before. In the same meeting, the group had discussed and welcomed an offer of help from Chapman Pincher. When MI5 let the government down by limiting their cooperation on party political issues, that laid the ground for the Met Police's bypassing of MI5. The earliest SDS report on CND in 1982 highlighted the organisation's spectacular growth in membership. It also made clear that the field of activity of CND's national and regional activities was, quote, aimed at swaying large bodies of influential opinion, including trade unions, the media, church groups and politicians. Swaying opinion is the function of any campaign. The state's concern was that CND campaigned against government policy and was very good at it. Both Kerry and Spence were targeted into the London CND Council, the most significant of those regional opinion-swaying executives. On any objective evaluation, their reporting was far more useful for countering campaigning than it was for securing military installations. The concern around public opinion was replicated in the 1984 SDS annual report. The purpose of those reports was to update the most senior Metropolitan Police officers and the Home Office on the groups infiltrated, the intelligence gathered, and the threats said to be posed. The focus of the section on CND was not on public disorder or subversion. It was on A, membership numbers, B, the political position, noting the Labour Party's official espousal of unilateral nuclear disarmament, and C, in Waite's words, that CND has skillfully manipulated public opinion over issues about which people are genuinely concerned. Waite says, I cannot now remember how I drew the distinction between CND campaigning to attract support for its cause and thereby bringing to public attention specific areas of concern, and a group skillfully manipulating public opinion. The word skillfully manipulated does not distinguish CND's campaigning from any other campaigning. The inclusion of these words emphasised that the Met Police and their masters considered that CND's campaigning had to be countered. The inclusion of those words in an annual report confirms that countering that campaigning was part of the SDS remit. Disclosure. The SDS managers, the security services and the Met Police have not assisted this inquiry with answers to the critical questions of A, why CND was infiltrated, B, who authorised, or C, tasked those infiltrations, and D, the use to which the reporting was put. In relation to Cathy Massiter, the security services disclosed one document and have insisted that further investigation would not be proportionate, woefully inadequate, on an issue of such importance. In respect of the Met Police, Chief Inspector McLeod has referred to a high-level special branch directive that led to all files on CND being destroyed. While there may have been some justification on the basis of the Home Office guidelines for destroying files on the individuals, there can be no justification for the destruction of files on policy, liaison, authorisation, and justification. Witness Z's evidence was that the pressure to investigate these organisations often came from the Prime Minister in Whitehall. We asked the inquiry to focus the Tranche 2 Module 2C inquiries and disclosure on not only the Home Office, but also on the engagement between the Met Police and the Ministry of Defence, the Cabinet Office and the Prime Minister's Office. Those inquiries should not be limited to the engagement in respect of CND, but should encompass the wider target base of the SDS. There's only one inference that can properly be drawn from the lack of engagement by the state. In the words of Chief Inspector Waite, the press would have made hay of the fact of us doing this, despite not being a police state. Conclusions. CND had affiliations from thousands of civil organisations. It organised in universities and through the churches. It had hundreds of thousands of members in local branches and nationally. CND was a mass democratic movement of ordinary people. But like governments before and since, the Thatcher government was terrified of two things. First, a mass movement of people, and secondly, democracy itself. So those are our submissions.
Thank you. We will now adjourn until tomorrow, when we will begin at 10 with Mr. Wood, King's Counsel, speaking on behalf of a dozen individual court participants.